So sometimes things change, right? This is a funny little phrase. All the scientists in the room are already saying you can't stop things from changing. Things are changing all the time, right? So that's the starting place for our conversation today. And I want to give you a sense that what we want to be able to do is to see around corners a little bit. I'm going to give you a couple of stories, and I'm going to connect those stories all the way through with a reasonably deep, fairly sophisticated, ridiculously overly challenging chat about business models just before we have something to drink. Having something to drink before we talk about business models would have been more sensible, but there are rules about this sort of thing at the Mayo Clinic. So let's begin here. Back when I was in college in the Jurassic period, I had a whole bunch of these things that you see here. And the people that owned the publication rights to music convinced me to sell them, to buy them all over again, as you see, if we can get this clicker to work, here. And then again here. So somehow or other, I've managed to buy my music collection 3 separate times, okay? And that's a little bit troubling because when last I looked, I had 31,000 songs in my personal music collection. Sometimes things change. It's easy, ladies and gentlemen, to stand in the present and to look backwards in time and to see those changes, to see moments that really matter when something is changing fundamentally. What's harder is to stand in the present and to see around corners and to understand the structure and the determinants or the shaping forces that cause us to have to go through really big changes right now. And my assertion for your consideration in this last segment of the day is that that's what's going on all through the world in healthcare. And there are so many traps set up for most of us that it's hard to see and hard to make sense of. So let's begin with a story. This is the yacht that won America's Cup yacht race number 31, AC-31 as the professional sailors call it, okay? AC-31 used this particular class of yachts that had to be sort of festooned with so many advances in material science and engineering that it was just an epic achievement, right? So I've sprayed onto the screen here a variety of different things that are characteristic of yachts of this class. You want to build yourself a yacht of this class, bring $94 million, okay? I can't afford the shoes that it takes to get on this boat. And here's the thing. If you're not using those advances, you have no chance of winning. If you're not using the really exotic, eye-wateringly expensive paint that actively aligns the water molecules as you're slicing your way through the ocean, you have 0 chance of winning. Your coefficient of friction is just too high. But what happened when we got to AC-32? Things changed fundamentally. The entire architecture of the boats changed. In fact, they changed so much that the best sailors in the world did not know how to pilot these boats. As many of you will know, in the qualifying races for AC-33 just last fall, outside of San Francisco, one of the best sailors in the world, very sadly, died trying to learn how to pilot one of these boats. A guy who had won America's Cup yacht races in the past. And let me just give you a little sort of bit of the feel of what this boat is like. This boat is so exotic, so weird, that it actually moves 5 times the speed of the wind pushing it. Now, I paid a whole lot of attention in physics class, and that just blows my mind. I have no idea how they do that. It's just really twisted. This boat is so strange that even as a great sailor, you can't stand there, look at the sail, and know how to run it. You actually have to use a supercomputer on board, measuring real-time data from 4,000 different sensors, and integrate it all into something that tells you how to run it. Remember the echo of what we heard about IBM Watson this morning. This boat is so freaky weird that it's actually airfoils in 2 directions. One of the airfoils, the one that you see horizontally in this picture, is lifting the boat out of the water. There's so little of the boat actually in the water that it no longer matters whether or not you're using that exotic paint, right? And the other airfoil gives it thrust. lift and thrust. This is a flying super wing. And in AC-31, what happened is the team that you see here, which came in second, won in the last 15 matches, 6 out of the first 7. But who were they up against? They were up against Larry Ellison of Oracle. And Larry Ellison hates to lose, as some of you will know. And so he had his team analyze every single data point from every nanosecond of those last 7 matches to figure out what they were missing. And they made 2 changes. They made a software change that would give them slightly better lift out of the water, and they made another change that would give the helmsman slightly better tiller feel. And they went on to win the next 7 matches in a row. Biggest upset in the history of sports. But here's the point for you. The difference between running that first boat that I showed you and running one of these boats is so significant that the very best people in the world at sailing boats would not know how to do it. So as the opening of my conversation with you today, I want you to consider the possibility that the business you're in may change so much and so fast that it's almost impossible for you to see some of the things that you're missing. And that is what sort of hydraulically pressures this problem of seeing around corners and guessing what's coming down the road in a future that we can only guess at, and one of the biggest times of change in the history of our species. How many of you think that this is one of the biggest times of change in the history of our species? Just show of hands. Okay, good. Most of you do. Scientists in broad numbers agree there's growing amount of data that a young child born today in rural China will see more change in her lifetime than her parents could have possibly dreamed of. And this is going to happen everywhere in the world, including this part of the world too. The biggest single change in our lifetime is interconnectedness. What you're seeing on this slide is a map of data flows all around our small blue planet. And that's what's going to give me the basis for giving you a sense of why business models matter, and innovation is just weirder than we think and stranger than we know. So I'm going to talk about innovation not just as an exercise in creativity, not in lateral thinking, not in some kind of magical thing like design thinking. I'm going to talk about it as a discipline, a science, and an emerging new set of practices that allow us to do things that are big and bold and beautiful. Some of you know that we have been researching this at Doblin for decades. One of the biggest discoveries we made 19 years ago is this idea that there are, in fact, 10 distinct types of innovation. I'm not going to go into this because I've talked about it from the Transform stage a few times before, okay? But it is important to understand that we see this as a diagnostic tool, a lens. We can use it as a diagnostic practice for entire industries and for any individual innovation within those industries. Sadly, if you just put people in a room and ask them to innovate, what they come up with is product ideas. What they typically miss is the types of innovation that have to do with business models and partnering and networking, and the types of innovations too often that have to do with experiences and channels and brands and the idea of engaging the patients or the customers in the co-construction of the future. So I'm going to use that as a little teensy bit of a lens. Those of you that have never heard me go on about this before, there is a book about it also called 10 Types of Innovation, which I don't want to talk about at all other than to say, if you've never heard this before, it might be worth reading the $6.8 million worth of research in that book, okay? Today, however, I've been asked by the CFI team to talk about business model transformation because I'm going to give you a reckless assertion that whether you've spotted it yet or not, in the healthcare field, globally, we are in a time of business model warfare. And the stakes for getting it wrong are enormous. And the challenge of getting it right is non-trivial. And so the ability to sort of see it clearly is, I think, helpful. Let's start with some non-medical examples. How many of you find yourselves being powered by one or another of the beverages made available by Starbucks every day? Show of hands, please. Okay, and how many of you have either the prepaid stored value card or the app on your phone to pay for your Starbucks beverages. Okay, quite a lot of you do. So the idea of Starbucks for now 26 years has been to take a commodity product and to sell it to you at 300, maybe 400% of its normal price, right? So that's certainly a public service. Some of you have noticed that they also provide free Wi-Fi. Why? Is that just because they're feeling generous? No, they provide free Wi-Fi because if they don't, they get a huge spike for business between roughly 7 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. in the morning, and then the rest of the day is flatlined. When they provide free Wi-Fi, you and me and a lot of other customers come all through the day and stay on average, I'm not making this up, 5.5 times as long. What's the principle there? We'll learn to provide something like an environment that people really like. 7 types of innovation are in evidence here, and all 3 colors are represented. As you're going to learn from me, that's a critical sort of diagnostic attribute, some piece of evidence that this is a big enough, bold enough, badass enough innovation to change a category and change the world. But just 4 years ago, they started to introduce new ways to pay. First with a prepaid plastic card, and more recently, with this app that you can download on your phone. 91 people a second download this app. And it's not obvious to me, ladies and gentlemen, maybe it would be to some of you, but there are lots and lots of people in the world that will gladly pay you Tuesday for a cup of coffee they don't plan to drink until 2 weeks from Friday. And I'm an innovation guy, and this was not obvious to me, okay? In the old days, 4 years ago, to power and finance its global expansion, Starbucks used to have complicated conversations with capital investors and bankers for lines of credit. Now, thanks to people willing to pay for coffee in advance, they sit on a big hoard of $3.4 billion in cash. And why? Because people that are willing to do this get a free cup of coffee on their birthday, okay? So I know, that sets them back, 7, maybe 8 cents. And so learning to see the world in terms of business models is extremely cool. How many of you use OpenTable when you make reservations now? Okay. So OpenTable radically lowers the cost for a restaurant trying to fill the seats and not have to pay salaries and benefits for people on the phone all day negotiating, typically with people with massive egos saying, well, we really can't make that time. You really need to make the best available table available to us when we can come, right? So this is a very annoying job for a lot of people and very difficult for the restaurant. But some of you will have tried to eat in one of Grant Achatz' 3 different restaurants in Chicago. This is the #1 rated chef in America. And what he learned to do was to sell the table seatings at all 3 of his systems with prepaid tickets. This massively increases the probability that you'll show up for your reservation, and it dramatically changes the cash flow, and he can charge different prices on Tuesdays than he does on Fridays. And people prepay, so there's no credit card involved, and you come and you have a good time. People tend to show up more than 99% of the time for a reservation they prepaid for. And this one innovation, just in that great restaurant system in Chicago, increased profitability by 38%. How many of you are members of Amazon Prime? Okay, so I'm going to deconstruct this for you. Here's the way Amazon Prime actually works. One day you got a very intimate invitation, an email telling you that you were one of their favorite customers, that they really like doing business with you, and they promised you this wicked great deal. They were going to give you free shipping for items that you ordered, not all the items, but select items that you ordered in 2 days. And they were going to give you free instant downloads of whatever that says there, 41,000 television shows and movies that nobody really watches. And they were going to give you access to 350,000 things that you could read on your Kindle, not your iPad, mind you, just your Kindle. 350,000 very carefully chosen things that nobody ever downloaded, okay? And you were going to be charged only $79 for this great service, okay? And that, in fact, is 6 types of innovation. Notice that all the colors are represented. Again, that's a pretty important thing to watch for. I'll explain to you why later. And millions of people have signed up for this deal. Well, analysts checked it out, and they started to go freaking out, as analysts frequently do when Amazon introduces something new. The analysts said, oh my God, this is a disaster. The analysts predicted that for the average person spending $79 to become a member of this club, they would be getting $90 worth of annual services, which implies an $11 loss per member. And they immediately said, oh my God, this is not a very profitable company. Ooga, dive, this is gonna really sink them. And they were warning everybody against this business model. But what really happened? Think about your own behaviors, those of you that are Amazon Prime members. Did you find yourself ordering more frequently from Amazon? Did you find yourself ordering weirder shit from Amazon? That's what happens, ladies and gentlemen. Let's explain this mechanism. People that became Amazon Prime members ordered 1.5 times as frequently per year and spent 2.4 times as much money per year as the same people before they were Prime members. This is what we call a psychological business model. People are smart. Once they pay 79 bucks, they start to say, well, I need to get my money's worth, right? Which is exactly what's behind the mechanism of Amazon raising the price to 99 bucks. They figure this is the gift that keeps on giving, okay? And so what actually happened, even when the price was just $79, is that Amazon was making 78 incremental dollars in profits from each of us that are Prime members. This is what made the stock price triple over the last 2 years. Business models matter. Let's take a deeper look now at some of the business models that are edgy and interesting in healthcare. And I want you to notice something. I am citing some of the most sophisticated, most interesting, edgiest business models in the world of healthcare, designed to address many of the tough, gnarly problems you've seen people talk about throughout the Transform conference here in 2014, right? So Optum Health, Mayo Clinic, a good partner of theirs. They've got several other good partners. Notice the pattern here. They are using a lot of great types of innovation. They're using them effectively and solidly, and they're getting data discovery across lots of different stakeholders to try to transform the way in which they're getting results. 5 types of innovation, all the colors represented. This is an example of taking the world we live in, thinking about it very hard, and creating something that is marginally better, okay? Same thing with the Joslin Diabetes Center. 6 types of innovation designed around behavioral shift to either prevent or reduce the effects of diabetes. Very impressive. Lots of attempts to culturally translate the ideal behaviors so that people can do it if they're African American or if they're, sort of Hispanic and they've got other cultural habits that people want to be sensitive to and sort of communicate within. Kaiser Permanente has built really great mobile clinics that it brings to different neighborhoods where they're trying to change the community pattern. So using 5 types of innovation, great, pattern. Sometimes you see the best, lowest cost innovations in the world exhibiting this way of thinking. This is the Aravind Eye and Ear Hospital. Uses a sliding scale to try to create better, visual acuity in rural India. Same exact technology is being used in downtown Chicago where I live, in fact, developed by the same people, the Kraft Eye Institute. In Chicago, if I wanted to do LASIK eye surgery, it's about $1,200 an eye. Sliding fee scale in India gets it down to as low as $10 per eye and runs the whole system profitably. This is not something that depends on, donations. When you learn to spot a moment that matters, the trick is to see that sometimes things are over-indexed in one part of this model. And in innovation, in healthcare delivery, it's almost all over-indexed on one or another form of technologies. either technologies, as we're now seeing mobility technologies or molecular technologies or surgical technologies. This is the way that most people think they're going to make people healthier. What we're learning over and over and over again is that the breakdowns are cultural and they're behavioral and they're about business models that really matter, and it's important to be able to see it with fresh eyes and with some new and helpful lenses. So I also now want to scare you just a little bit. What's happening to a great healthcare delivery organization, whether it's Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic or John Hopkins or Kaiser Permanente or any of the other great ones, is that a lot of very smart players are now coming in to skim the cream and behave differently. This is what the world's largest retailer is doing, Walmart. Remember that they sell a little over $1 billion a day worth of goods and services to you and to me. $1 billion a day. And lately what they've decided to do is to put pretty good quality clinics inside of their stores to transform healthcare delivery. This is not a new idea. Walgreens is doing it too. CVS was doing it earlier. They bought Minute Clinic, which started to create this idea of a convenience store for healthcare, right? But you see Walgreens now emphasizing well at Walgreens. They now can see that the more they emphasize multiple types of innovation, the larger piece of the healthcare puzzle they're going to be able to sell. We heard this morning from the guy running the Watson program at IBM, fantastic presentation about something incredibly important, cognitive computing, to try to reduce the complexity of healthcare. This is going to be, in our estimation, one of the most important transformational engines, one of the most disruptive transformational systems, because what's great about it is it will help the best doctors here at Mayo Clinic. It will also help the nurse practitioner deep in rural Kenya somewhere that doesn't know what she's encountering and needs to have a diagnostic engine. Why this matters is because the average doctor today has to master more than 200 times the amount of information that the doctor that helped you get born 20, 30, 40 years ago had to master in his or her lifetime. It's ridiculous to expect doctors to be able to keep up with this pace of learning and change. So what do we learn from this? What we learn is that innovation is hard, that it's changing faster than we think, and that we have to not only think about the technologies, the services at the core, but the way in which we're going to spend money to get there. WhatsApp getting a valuation of $19 billion. Looking at Alibaba starting to get the biggest valuation in the history of the world. What we know for a fact is that modern innovation is characterized by crowds, clouds, partners, and prizes. So we're learning to get breakthroughs in the process, none of which is a surprise to the incredibly impressive Center for Innovation here at Mayo Clinic, which is very astute about the use of these modern catalysts and accelerants to effective innovation. But what we in our room, collectively, Mayo Clinic's leaders, its partners, its design practitioners, and the people in this room need to see is that most of the value that's coming in the world is coming around ecosystems, not individual companies. So consider for the next few moments that one of the biggest shifts in our lifetime is the way in which the most valuable things in a connected world, not too surprisingly when you stop and think about it, start to do really hard things in orchestrated ways through ecosystems. So in clean tech, you see companies like Autodesk and Philips and Siemens and General Electric. In logistics, you see lots of great shipping companies and companies that are starting to create integrated things that sort of make globalization work all around the world. You can see this everywhere when you start looking for it. In transportation, whether it's Uber or Boston Coach or Zipcar, there's some great innovations going on there. And in package shipping, you see the same kinds of things starting to happen. That's why Amazon works and everybody else starts to get things that are coming perfectly when expected, no matter what. Let's look around the horizon a little bit and see some other network-based businesses that are now functioning as ecosystems. So what you see elsewhere in the world is brand new things sort of emerging around sports, around media, fantastically big transformational engines terrible business model problems under very deep threat, but the companies that are doing the best work are the ones that partner well with others, okay? And the same thing is beginning to happen, of course, in healthcare as well. So we're not immune from this. We begin to see it in things like, sort of the Joslin Diabetes Center, or the entire ecosystem of more than 200 companies around Weight Watchers, certainly Mayo Clinic itself, Cleveland Clinic, virtually all of the best cancer centers are ecosystems of businesses trying to deal with complex conditions. Financial services functions this way, so does the real estate world. So that is one of the most important takeaways from my brief conversation with you today. You want to create something amazing today? Figure out how to create it not just acting as your firm alone, but in close orchestrated cooperation with others. The iTunes Music Store shows us the direction, but we all have to learn to see those things as now normal, necessary, and the ideal way to deal with complexity. So I told you I was going to tell you 2 stories. I'm going to finish with a little story about something I've got my graduate students working on right now. Graduate design students at the Institute of Design. And 3 weeks ago tonight, I told them 2 weeks ago tonight, I told them a little story about Keisha here. Not a real story, made up. Keisha has 3 babies, all under the age of 8, from 2 different baby daddies. And she lives a really tough life. Every day, her day begins at 5 a.m. She has to get on various forms of public transportation to bring herself to a succession of 3 different minimum wage jobs. At each of those jobs, she's treated like dirt. She's told every single day in ways large and small that if she screws up, if she can't show up at work, if she can't be on time, if she is chronically late or unhealthy, there's 100 people standing in line that will take her job for the lousy wages that she's being paid. She does this all day long. She's leaving at 5 a.m. She doesn't get home before 8 p.m. typically. She knows when she gets home that what she should be doing is fixing her kids a healthy meal. She's smart, but she's exhausted, right? And to get the healthy ingredients for the healthy meal, she'd have to take another bus a couple of miles away to buy some organic foods that she can't afford. About that time, at 8 p.m., the flaming hot Doritos are looking like a pretty good meal solution for the family. Oh, by the way, when she showed up in the room at 8 o'clock at night, a bunch of little babies attached themselves to her like barnacles because they were really in desperate need of some mommy time. And who was taking care of them all day? Her mother, who was really pissed off about this because she didn't sign up for that. This is the series of problems we have. Where are the baby daddies? Well, trying to do some things to help their kids. They had engaged in a life of some petty crime, increasingly got caught for it, built up a record which made it impossible for them to get jobs, and created a breakdown pattern that is recycling all over the place. I'm challenging graduate students to think this through. And I want to show you a really important principle drawn entirely from ideas that have been on the stage here at Transform about why this matters and how you can think about it. Very pragmatically, here's what you know. You know that in the modern world, innovation is more and more about elegant integration and less about primary invention. Let me illustrate that point. If you've got a smartphone, if you've got a tablet computer of some type or another, you know that there's a bazillion different apps that you could buy. You pick the ones that are right for your life, and you integrate them in an elegant way so that it does what you want. This is how our lives work now. We pick what we need. I dare say there's no 2 smartphones anywhere in this room configured exactly the same way, right? What if what Keisha needs is like that too? So examine this hypothesis, I said to my graduate students, right? We built a little community center. We put a minute clinic in it. That minute clinic is able to tell whether Keisha's kids have a serious earache that deserves maybe some antibiotics. They make sure those kids have vaccinations if they're going to get to school. We create in there the ability to determine whether or not those kids have any classic or chronic problems that deserve a different kind of intervention. Rebecca Oney was on this stage at Transform 3 years ago as an advisor to Mayo Clinic ever since. She created the world where if there are chronic problems, Keisha's kids have chronic problems with, let's say, asthma, they can figure out that the challenge is not health care, but in fact, getting rid of the cockroaches in the apartment. And they can help to orchestrate the city services to help Keisha at home, right? Oh, by the way, Rebecca Oney got her MacArthur Genius Grant several years ago for this work. Always a good idea to pay attention to the people that get that nice little MacArthur Genius Grant thing. And I recommend it to those of you in the audience. They're really cool to get, so you should get yourself one. She got $500,000 to do with what she wanted. A fellowship came to her in 2009. On the stage last year was Gary Slutkin. Gary has taken his expertise in infectious disease control, used to try to prevent the spread of AIDS in Africa as a continent, and instead adapt it to violence prevention in cities all over the world. Gary Slutkin has created an innovation, an intervention that acts like vaccines that have to do with reducing gang violence in every city where it's been in use. Will Allen was supposed to be on our stage today. Couldn't make it, as you know. John Hockenberry explained that in a useful way. What Will Allen is doing is helping us to create jobs for kids that are largely unemployable. In Wisconsin and in Chicago, he's created organic farming systems and taught kids that have police records that are basically unhirable how to be great farmers, right? Using 5 types of innovation. He got his MacArthur Genius Grant in 2008. Too bad we didn't get to meet him in person today. And there's also something called Cabrini Green Legal Aid Clinic in Chicago that clears young people's legal records so that they can get a job, so that they can get whatever that stupid shoplifting thing was removed, eradicated from their records so they can honestly say when applying for a job that they don't have a police record, okay? Those are the things that might come together in a world-class community center. How many of you are busy trying to solve problems right now of community health somewhere in the world? Show of hands, please. Okay, I'm going to estimate that's at least 20% of the audience. What if community health is more and more about economic integration of sophisticated business models and only a little bit about medicine? Would you buy that as a hypothesis? It turns out to be the case. 7 years ago, an idea similar to this was created in Chicago and funded by Gary Comer, the guy who was the founder of Land's End. It's called the Gary Comer Youth Center. And the ideas that you're seeing integrated here, which would use fully 8 types of innovation, are in evidence here in the Gary Comer Youth Center. What is being done by my students now? They're figuring out exactly what the predictive analytics are when a particular community is going below threshold in order to need a sophisticated systemic intervention, and figuring out the business model that pays off. If you can create a business model where young people can get jobs, if you can create a business model where young people have a robust chance to make their lives better, an opportunity society, you make all kinds of changes. At the Gary Comer Youth Center, they teach all of this. You can go there from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. You can learn skills, you can learn to be media, you can do programming, you can do robotics, you can make art, you can learn to have athletic skills. Your kids can get the kind of care that they need in a light clinic, all of it integrated. We are now establishing the community data that is able to show what the payback is from all of these systemic ways of integrating. We live in the most amazing time of change ever, ladies and gentlemen. What if our job, when we want to create community health, is to learn to have a smaller number of bigger ideas, to learn to establish that important principle of effective integration, not primary invention. Look past the technology to the experiences we're creating for human beings and the business models that make it work. This is the Gary Comer Youth Center. It's a model that in the way it was done first is impossible to replicate. It was too costly. What I expect fully is that the students working on it now will figure out how to create modular, innovations that any community anywhere in the world can start to stipulate and have the plugged-in analytics under the covers to show how it pays back when you innovate in precisely that way. I've gone on a little bit too long, and I apologize to everybody because I know the drinking portion of the festivities is right around the corner. What I do want to tell you is that I posted these slides for you, as is my habit, on a secure website. If you want the slides, a way to study them a little bit more deeply, go to clientweb.doblin.com. Your event code will be TXFM space 2014. That will get you the notes. Mostly I want to leave you with one final thought. The innovations that we need, ladies and gentlemen, are more sophisticated than ever before. Be wary of those things that are so complicated that they don't climb down the confusion curve and become elegant again. That's what modern, complicated, and sophisticated innovation needs to deliver. Not just a suite of really complicated things, but elegant, beautiful things that make a wild, systemic, beautiful difference. That's what's worthy of the term innovation now. That's the kind of innovation that is constantly being sought and delivered at Mayo Clinic Center for Innovation, a model for all of us, and always an exemplary inspiration to me and to the people that I know that think about innovation in this more disciplined, systemic, integrated way. Thank you very much for the chance to be together with you.
Got some housekeeping details here. First, how much of a sucker am I that I'm an Amazon Prime customer and have a Starbucks card?
Yeah.
Pretty bad?
Yeah, no, I think we can pretty much soak you for everything.
Yeah, right, exactly. I've just got a nose ring here.
I'm going to alert all my friends that are trying to market complicated ideas.
They know already. In the third set, Kai Nishikori is serving 2-5. He's losing 6-3, 6-3, 5-2 to Marin Cilic. It looks like we're almost at triple match point here. So if you want to catch the U.S. Open out in the reception area or at the end of the U.S. Open, have fun at the reception. Please don't miss the Joe Richmond session tonight at the Geffen Theater. The information people will tell you how to get there. It's not far from here. It's just a quick walk across the street. Joe Richmond will have testimony from his Radio Diaries series, definitely patient-centric stories and storytelling, and you'll really meet some heartwarming and amazing people, and Joe will have some great stories to tell there. Meet the speakers right in front, including Larry, and we will start promptly at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Thanks so much. See you at the reception. Thanks, Larry.
Of course, John.